Hey Sam. We have received some word about returning to reading creepypastas again, but this time, with Harold, Anthony, and Anthera.
Since fucking when? Because I wasn't sure if I was gonna be back to doing that shit again after what had happened before. Ugh, Jesus. Okay, let's just get this done. I'm just gonna read the stories, if possible.
Okay. And Harold had set up the stuff to get us ready. Just keep your cool, Sam.
Moved out of the house back in 2002 once he got his job as a computer technician, and he recently went missing. When I went to his house, it was locked, with 3 sheets of printer paper taped to the front door. While coming home from work one day, I noticed someone had left their damaged, plain gray laptop laying in the middle of my driveway. I got out of my car to examine it more carefully. The LCD definitely showed signs of user-related damage. There was a large hole on the left side of the screen that appeared to fit a standard Phillips head screwdriver perfectly. There was a webcam above the display, and it was also destroyed with what looked like the same screwdriver. Other than those, everything else on the computer showed minor signs of wear. Almost all of the keyboard's keys were faded, but not to the extent that the laptop could be considered unusable. I looked at the back of the display to find out what brand it is, but I couldn't find anything. I looked at the entire laptop shell, but there was no text or logo stating what brand it was. In fact, there was no warranty sticker, no proof of license sticker on the bottom, no text whatsoever. What was even more odd was the fact that the only ports on the laptop were a VGA port for connecting an external display and a USB port. How long could this laptop have possibly run without a charging port to recharge the battery? It must have been a very low-end laptop, where you had to remove the battery pack and put it into its own charging dock. Why did it have a webcam, though? Curious as to what was on the laptop, I ran inside to my basement where my old desktop was currently being stored. The reason it was down there was because I forgot to bring that behemoth to the local Sarkin to recycle it. I would have been using it as my regular computer, but it takes 5 or 6 hours to fully boot, because the system always goes through recovery mode every time you start it, and the processor is way too slow to recover everything on the 500GB hard drive I had installed on it. A 120MHz Pentium processor doesn't get you far. I removed the old LG CRT monitor from the desktop and plugged it into the laptop. I went to push the power button when I stopped. There's no way this is going to work. The battery has to be dead by now. I rummaged around the basement to find my battery voltage tester and immediately withdrew the battery from the laptop and checked the voltage. Lo and behold, it had no charge. Well, I thought, might as well just leave it and take everything to Sarkin tomorrow morning. With that, I unplugged the display from the laptop, put it back into the desktop and simply left everything downstairs. After leaving the basement, I went to go watch TV for about 3 hours or so before going to bed. I was suddenly awakened from my deep slumber by the sound of the Windows 2000 startup jingle and fell out of my bed. It was so deafeningly loud, I swore someone was holding a pair of speakers right next to my ears. I stood up in a groggy daze, and it took a couple of minutes to figure out what the sound was. The desktop. I must have accidentally hit the power switch while trying to switch monitors. I headed to the basement, but froze in the middle of the steps. I just remembered there was no way my computer could have started up, because I have Windows 95 installed on my desktop. I was reluctant to go down the steps after that, but my common sense started kicking in and I thought I must be getting my OSs mixed up. When I walked down, I was shocked to see that my desktop wasn't on. In fact, I remembered it wasn't even plugged in. I had to make sure of it though. I checked behind the desktop, everything else was plugged in except for the power. There was absolutely no chance of that laptop turning on. It was impossible. I removed the battery from the laptop again and rechecked the voltage. This time, I couldn't get a direct number. The voltage tester was just going insane. I reinserted the battery and pressed the power button on the laptop. Some indicator lights flashed, meaning the computer definitely started, except this time the startup jingle wasn't played at all. I needed to see what was going on here. I connected the CRT monitor back into the laptop, and what I saw was a bare desktop with 3 icons in the corner. The taskbar was empty, and there was no start menu button. The wallpaper was black. Why would anyone do this to their desktop? Anyone could remove all the icons, but they had to be pretty skilled hackers to remove the start menu button. Of the 3 icons, one was a games folder, one was a videos folder, and the last was the DOS command prompt program. Maybe this was a kid's laptop? Clicking on the games folder confirmed my suspicions. A little girl must have owned this laptop. I felt some remorse for the poor girl because there was only one game in the folder. The program name was Princess X. I clicked on it just to see what the game was like. A fully animated title screen came up with various generic fairy tale princesses twirling across the screen, and then the logo flew down with a bunch of sparkly dots holding it. The game was called Princess Creator, Make Yourself Beautiful. Ah, so it must have been one of those low-budget, put PNG of various clothing items onto a photo of yourself games. I was right. As the menu popped up, I was given the option to dress up or to view pretty pictures. I wanted to see what the girl looked like, so I clicked on the second option. She had to have been no more than 5, and on top of that she looked very cute. She was of either Mexican or Spanish origin. She wore a somewhat tattered white dress with small red frills around the sleeves and collar. It had small roses on it. I smiled as she looked like she had a lot of fun putting a virtual tiara on her head. However, browsing through the photos, about halfway through, there were pictures of a room with nothing else but a bed inside. She must have been dodging the camera for the hell of it, I guess. After that I felt I'd seen enough with that program and might as well go see the other 2 files on the laptop. I decided to go into the command prompt to see if I could locate any other files on the hard drive. I simply got a \_ line with no drive letter. Okay, this is really strange, I thought. I typed into the command box, start C, \_ to see if I could open the directory I wanted to explore. I pressed enter, and DOS simply replied, start is not recognized as an internal or external command, operable program or batch file. After a few seconds, the program crashed, bringing me back to the desktop. So I guess the last thing to look at is the videos. I double-clicked the folder, and the screen faded to black. I thought it had crashed, but I noticed that there was a small underline flashing in the top left corner. Suddenly, the text, start, \_ videos \_ 001 WMV, flashed briefly, then a video appeared in full screen. It was the girl again. This time, she was smiling, bouncing slightly in excitement. Her happiness made my heart feel warm. My guess was that she must have been recording herself play the dress-up game with a webcam. At first she was simply moving her finger across the trackpad, clicking, then giggling excitedly for a bit. She must have been laughing at the thing she put on herself in the game. After about 2 minutes or so, the screen would cut to black for a fraction of a second, and then return to the girl playing the game. This time, however, she was dressed differently, in a simple pink t-shirt with words, "Go Go Girl," stitched in glitter. I guessed the game was recording her every time she started it, without her knowing. That made me sort of uneasy. I mean, why would anyone program a game to do that? Whatever, I guessed it was going to be the same sort of thing over and over with a video, so I might as well turn off the computer. I reached over and pressed the power button, and it didn't shut off this time. The video continued to play, and I saw the girl this time was wearing an orange tank top with nothing on it. She was smiling and giggling as usual, and I thought maybe I could turn off the computer after the video is done. It couldn't be that long. The video seemed to drag on, with more cuts of her playing the game in a different outfit, and I started to doze off. However, after the next cut in the video, the girl was just staring at the camera with an expressionless look on her face. Wondering what the hell was going on, I've become interested in the video again. This one didn't make me smile. It made me extremely uneasy to watch her without her usual smiley face on. It was dark in the room, but there was one desk light on at the side. She was in some sort of nightwear. What was she going to do? She sat there for a minute with that blank expression, like she wasn't thinking at all. I started to get really tense, as if something awful was about to happen. She bent over and picked up a handsaw from the left side of where she was sitting. She held it in front of her, showing it to the camera. Then, she placed the jagged blade on the side of her cheek. I cringed at what I was seeing. Slowly, she began slicing into her right cheek. Blood drizzled down her neck as she did it. Slowly, the side of her teeth began to show after about 10 seconds. As the saw went lower on her face, more of her teeth began to show on the side. Blood covered almost the entire right side of her face. She eventually got to the bottom of her jawbone and sawed a tiny piece off of it too. Her cheek fell to the ground with a small thud, and she put the saw in her lap and continued to stare at the camera, emotionless. I couldn't take much more of this and tore the battery out of the laptop, but the video continued to play. Then, the next cut began. The girl screamed in extreme pain. I almost fell out of my seat, it was so loud. She screamed and put her hands over her now absent cheek. She continued to scream in agony for about 10 seconds, then a knocking was heard from the side. It was a woman yelling in a language I couldn't understand. She was pounding the door, but not opening it. The girl must have locked it. I tried to unplug the monitor from the laptop, but it was stuck in. I didn't want to see what happened next. The screaming and the yelling continued up until the next cut. She was back in her emotionless state again, but her cheek was still missing. The woman at the door was pounding and yelling still. It must have been her mother. The girl then raised the saw up to her right shoulder and began cutting just as slowly as last time. I gagged at the sight of this. It was a holocaust of wrong. The blood began to stream out in all directions. The yelling behind the door fell silent. I guessed the other woman was trying to get someone to help her, either the father or brother or whatnot. When she hit the bone, an awful grinding noise could be heard. I covered my ears, but I could still hear it vividly through my hands. I noticed that a piece of her muscle got stuck on one of the steel teeth of the saw. This cut ended a lot faster than before, and the next cut was the same thing except the color from her face was draining, and her pain-ridden screams became quickly weaker. Her clothing was completely red, with blood on the right side. Then, she became motionless again. Oh God, what is she going to cut off next? The mother returned with what sounded like 2 other people, and they were all yelling in the same language as before. She raised the saw and began cutting the right side of her head off. Loud thuds were sounding at the door. They were trying to knock it down. She continued to work her way down, with blood going in all sorts of directions. The thuds still repeated themselves on the door. I was mostly confused as to how she kept going, even after she went through her brain with a saw. Her right eye rolled into the back of her head. Blood began leaking out of it. She eventually made it to the top of her mouth, where she hacked her way through bones and teeth. It was the single worst sound I have ever heard in my entire life. I still hear it in the back of my head some days. The thuds continued, and deep in the back of my mind I hoped they wouldn't be able to break the door down so they wouldn't have to see such an awful sight. She finally made it through, and with that, the right side of her head fell to the side of her neck, held on only by a piece of skin. I remember the chilling sound of her jaw being unhinged when it was tugged violently by the force of the top half of her head. She put the saw down to her side. The cut ended, and in the next cut, she simply fell face down onto the desk. Half her brain fell out onto the desk on impact, and her eye popped out of its socket. Blood pooled on the desk. The people trying to break down the door finally made it in, and they were hysterical at what they saw. Their daughter was in pieces. The mother vomited and ran out of the room. The father ran to the daughter, put her head back together and cried, holding her head at the side of his. The other man, presumably the girl's older brother, simply stared in horror at what he saw. The horrifying self-mutilation finished with that cut, and the screen cut back to the empty room with the bed. With a sigh of relief that it was over, I sat there, breathing heavily and sweating. I didn't realize that the room was so hot until now. I had so many questions to ask. How was all this possible? It frightened me, and I spent a good 30 minutes sitting in the chair, and finally I got the courage to get up. I looked back at the laptop for what I hoped was the last time. The room, with a bed, glared on the screen. Then it cut to something else. It was a cut of my face in the basement using the laptop.
Hello. This thing happened to me a few months ago. I just need to share it with somebody. It all started at my friend's party. He's an artist who rented out a loft in the industrial part of town. If you can picture what a place like Detroit looked like in the 1920s, that's what this area looks like. A bunch of old turn-of-the-century factories crammed into 10 blocks. Most of them are abandoned. So I partied a little too hard that night and decided to crash on a couch at the loft. I woke up at around 4 a.m. The sun wasn't out yet, but you could still make things out in the dim blue light. I went to the bathroom, carefully tiptoeing around the people that were passed out on the floor. As I was taking a piss, I tiptoed to look out the bathroom window and I saw the panorama of deserted urban decay. I remembered how much I liked places like this. It was so dark and devoid of life, and strangely serene. So I went back to the couch and tried to fall asleep. After 45 minutes of staring at the ceiling, I decided I didn't want to be there any longer, so I swallowed my pride and decided to wake my girlfriend up, to beg her for a ride, since walking around the vacant streets at this time was not an option. Being an awesome girlfriend, she was totally cool with it, and told me she would be there in about a half hour, and that she would give me a call when she was outside. My phone died 10 minutes later, so I decided I would sit by the window and watch for her car. I sat there for a while and my eyes started getting heavy and I began to doze off. A crashing noise outside woke me up. It wasn't loud, but just enough to snap me into reality. I looked out the window and scanned the area, but didn't see anything. Across the street, from the loft, near a mountain of garbage bags and one of those enormous dumpsters, I see a computer and a monitor smashed against the floor that hadn't been there before. When my girlfriend arrived, I went downstairs and greeted her. Just as I was about to get in the car, I remembered a friend of mine who had blown out his power supply. So I decided to walk over to the dumpster and see what I could salvage. The monitor was worthless, but the tower seemed to have suffered almost no damage, so I put it in the trunk and we drove off. About a week had passed and I had completely forgotten about the tower until my girlfriend called to let me know that it was still in the trunk and that she wanted it out. That night I brought it home. Before I took it apart, I decided to hook it up to my monitor to see if it still ran, and to my surprise it did. It ran Windows XP and it looked like it had been wiped clean. I decided to do searches for words like creepypasta in hopes of finding some secret stash full of weird deviant porn the previous owner had forgotten about. Morbid curiosity, I guess. Search came up nothing. Searched for picture files, nothing. Then I searched for movies and one file came up. It was an AVI inside a folder titled Barbie, hidden in the windows/system32 directory. So I played it. Now this is where it gets disturbing. The movie was about an hour long and was made up of what seemed like raw exported footage. The footage was of this woman sitting on a chair and talking against a white backdrop. I skipped through most of the movie and it was all the same continuous shot. Then I decided to sit through the footage to find out what she was talking about. 15 seconds into the footage, the audio goes completely bad and her voice is drowned in harsh static/background noise. I couldn't make out a thing. So I imported the footage into Final Cut and tried to mess with the levels to isolate her voice. It helped a little, but I still couldn't hear what she was saying. I was intrigued now, and I began to really pay attention to her face and body language. It seems that she's being asked some kind of questions, because she stops at times to listen, and then continues talking. About 15 minutes into the footage, her face begins to redden and contort as if the questions are bothering her. But she continues to answer them anyway. Shortly after, she begins to cry. She sobs hysterically for the duration of the film. One of the few words I could read was skin. She repeats this word many times throughout the footage, and at one point she even pulls at the skin from her arm and mouths the word. She seems to be unhappy with her skin. There is much more I have to get off my chest, but it is getting late and I can't go on. I will share the rest tomorrow. God save my soul. It kept on building and building, and about 40 minutes in she's crying so hard she can barely look at the camera. She stops talking at this point and the rest of the footage is just her crying with her head down. Oddly enough, she doesn't get up or move. The screen just fades to black. I was fucking dumbfounded. I played the whole thing through many times that night, trying to find inflections and nuances in her movement that would reveal anything else about what was going on. I felt so dissatisfied, I wanted to know more. That's when I noticed that there was about 10 more minutes left on the timeline after the screen went black, and about 2 minutes in there was more footage. The footage was extremely shaky, almost unwatchable, and depicted a pair of legs walking along train tracks. My guess is that camera was accidentally left on as it was being carried somewhere. The person in this footage walks along the train tracks for about 6 minutes and then turns into the forest and walks over what looked like foliage, flattened by a piece of plywood. The person continues on this makeshift plywood road until the movie clip ends. Now my heart started beating with excitement because there were train tracks a few miles away that looked very similar to the one in the video. I had to check this out. I called up my friend Ezra. He's 6'4", 250 pounds of mostly muscle. I convinced him to go on a little adventure with me. I'm no pushover myself, but I felt if was to go wandering in the woods looking for God knows what, extra muscle couldn't hurt. This whole idea of investigating this video had me so excited I couldn't sleep. The next morning, on a sunny Saturday, I took my flashlight, my camera, and my 7-inch car with a matte black finish and serrated edge and went to pick up Ezra. When I got to his house he wasn't even awake. When I woke him he pretty much told me to fuck off. I was already packed and I had mentally prepared myself to do this, so I decided to go through with it without him. I parked my car at the train station, took my stuff, and hopped onto the tracks. After walking for about 2 hours, I saw a broken piece of plywood and my knees almost buckled with excitement. I searched the nearby foliage, and there it was, a little plywood trail leading into the forest. I walked slowly along the trail, paying close attention to everything. I would stop occasionally, kneel down, and listen for anything or anyone, but it was so quiet. This was one of the most nerve-wracking things I've ever done. I didn't know what to expect at the end of this trail. The dense tree line gave way into a little island of grassy field, and then I saw it, a house, being consumed by the forest. From the looks of it, no one had lived there for 20, maybe 30 years. I got my camera and snapped a few pics. A few yards away from the house was a tool shed made of rusty sheet metal. I just sat there among the trees for a while, absorbing everything. I didn't want to go into the open field. I had this bad feeling that something would see me. It took me a while to muster the courage to walk to the house. The door was partly opened. I pushed it in with a flashlight and was relieved that the inside was actually very well lit. I put my flashlight away, got my camera and took a few more pics. There was no furniture. The floor was riddled with bricks and wood and rubble, and some of the walls had huge holes in them. When I went in further to explore, I saw some things that I didn't pay much mind to in that moment, but now that I think about them in hindsight, they greatly disturb me. The first thing that seemed a little odd was that one of the doors in the first room that I presumed led to the basement seemed a little too new to be in this house. It was also the only door in the house that was locked. Also, when I made my way up to the second floor, I saw some chairs and a fold-up table that also seemed a little too new to be there. But what disturbed me the most for some reason was the bathroom. The dust on the mirror had been wiped away, and in the bathtub I saw a clear plastic tarp that still had water and droplets on it from when I presume it was washed clean. That's when I heard something moan really loud and fuzz when I jumped the fuck out of the second-story window and ran back to the tracks. Halfway there I realized the moaning was most likely a water pipe expanding or contracting, and that little moment of relief gave into the horror which I felt when I wondered why the water would be running on an abandoned house in the middle of the fucking woods. It's been a little more than 2 months since this happened and I haven't gone back there, nor do I plan to.
There is a video on the internet that goes by the name of "We Kept Driving." This video depicts a man driving down a rainy road at night following a black car into nowhere. However, this video is merely a distraction from the audio. You see, the audio in this video is designed with malicious intent. At first, it might seem like a slightly unsettling two-tone repeated every 10 seconds, but this feeling of unsettlement is the feeling that the creator of this video wanted. After a few seconds, a man will start speaking to the viewer in Russian. It is unclear what the man is talking about, but he appears to quite relaxed about whatever he is speaking about. Apparently, upon multiple viewings of the video, strange artifacts will appear in the video, such as the video changing size, the picture blurring, the speech of the Russian man changing, and weird, distorted noises playing over the top of the two-tone. There have also been reports of miseries, headaches, depression and paranoia whilst watching the video. The final effect of the video is one that doesn't seem to be caused by other horror-based videos, pain in the wrists and ankles, as well as the inability for the video to fade out. The video will keep playing at a constant volume, even if you turn your speakers down, off entirely, or walk away from the video, almost as if the video has buried itself deep into your subconscious. However, if you start off with a video on mute, the video will stay on mute. It only seems to keep playing at the highest volume you have set it to. Apparently, playing the video at a high volume results in more damaging side effects such as seizures, migraines, loss of sight, for the duration of the video, out-of-body experiences, and hallucinations of a white man standing to the right of the viewer about 3 feet away. Keep looking left. During this time, it's worth noting that the video can only be seen 360p, and that the video also has the ability to change to lag and slash or crash your computer. Viewer discretion is advised. The final side effect of this video is extreme paranoia around windows. If you look into or around a window during the time the video is playing, you may see people standing outside, looking at you directly. All the people who watched the video claim to have had dreams after watching the video. The majority of the dreams are loosely connected, however, there are few connecting themes: 2 teenage boys being chased by some unescapable entity, security cameras, illogical amounts of blood, traumatic experiences, and strange, undefinable, floating objects. Most of these dreams end with a dreamer jumping out of a window or smashing a window. It is unknown whether the video still exists, but if it does, run. The man in the video is not a friend. He uses the video as a tracker to find his next victim.
The grifter is an alleged video that was first mentioned somewhere on 4chan/x/image board. Watching it is said to be a soul-rending experience, far more horrible than anything one could imagine. The image in the right is said to contain screenshots of some of the scenes in the video. The few that have watched it are said to have been killed in their own homes, with only one thing in common: a strange doll, hidden somewhere in their homes. There is a message by the end of the video in the constructed international auxiliary language Esperanto, and says, "This child, now a young man, is still alive and lives in a local shelter whose name was not given. He never spoke, and still is Katadoni left square bracket sick right square bracket."
A couple of months ago, I began my classes at Chico State University. As I was preparing for my freshman year, I was able to find everything that I needed, except for a laptop. I'm not exactly very good at letting $1 go for something, especially when I could get that something for less. I scoured the internet for good deals on laptops, finding none that suited my frugal habits. Classes were only 2 weeks away, and I was becoming desperate for a computer. Several days later, I saw an ad in the newspaper for a laptop that was being sold for only $600, and not too far from where I live. It was a very nice Dell laptop too, seeming odd that it was being sold for almost $1,000 less than store price. I drove to the seller's address the following day. The house was farther out of the city, butting up to a dense forest. Outside of the house was an old Chevrolet, and a mess of old signs and other various vintage-looking items. I rang the doorbell, and a thin man in a flannel jacket came to the door. When I asked about the laptop, he looked almost relieved, and told me he was ready to sell it immediately. Luckily, I came with cash in hand, and after proof of good condition, I went home with a new computer. Excited to have my first self-bought laptop, I powered it up and began uploading my own programs and applications onto it. Upon searching the hard drive, I found a folder hidden away on it, which was odd, because the man selling it told me that the memory was wiped clean and ready for a fresh start. The folder was titled September 17th 10, presumably a date. I opened the folder, revealing 6 videos and 3 pictures. Curiosity got the best of me, and I decided to watch the videos. The first video was simply titled 001. The video was shot from a shaky camcorder inside of a vehicle, recording a woman walking out of a bar and getting into her car at night. After a couple of seconds the woman drove off, and almost immediately, the person recording the video began to drive after her. The video ended after 24 seconds. It almost seemed like the cameraman had been waiting for the woman for a while. Come to think of it, I wasn't too alarmed by this at the time, just a little unsettled. I opened the next video file, titled 002. I assumed that this was the next part of the first video. My assumption was right, as it began with the camera on top of the console, facing out of the windshield. It was raining now, leading me to believe that this was a short while after the first video ended. I could barely make out that the vehicle 2 cars ahead of this one was the same car that the woman at the bar left in. This went on for an unsettling 47 seconds before the camera cut out. I began to get a little nervous, fearing that this might take a turn for the worst. But, as if I was watching a television show, I wanted to see where this was headed. Not totally concerned yet, I decided to press on. The third video was, of course, titled 003. This was the one that got me officially concerned. The clip began from the same shaky hands as the first clip. It was now pouring rain outside of the car, and I could barely make out a figure in a fur coat with an umbrella walking to the front door of a house. I could only assume who this person was, and whose house this belonged to. The figure entered the house and closed the door. The following stillness greatly unnerved me. The only thing that could be heard was the sound of rain dumping on top of the car. After roughly 2 minutes of this nerve-wracking nothingness, the lights inside of the house cut out. Another minute or so went by, before the camera was placed onto the console again and the sound of a person exiting the car broke the stillness. After the car door quietly closed, another figure, this time hooded, could be seen walking towards the house. I began to feel a knot tightening in the bottom of my stomach, as the stranger walked around to the back of the house. Whoever this person was, they definitely weren't supposed to be there. After another couple of seconds, the lights to the outside of the house cut out. It was pitch black, and only the rain alerted me that the camera was still rolling. The video ended after about 9 minutes of rain and darkness. I was now pretty sure that this was not an innocent little project or anything of that nature, and I began to feel stupid for not checking this laptop seller's credibility. Was this person stalking the woman the same person that I met with earlier? Throughout the whole experience, I had a dormant thought in the back of my head to call the police, but I wasn't ready just yet. Reluctantly now, I began the fourth video 004. It was dark again, but the rain had stopped, and I was left with only silence. Not long after the clip began, I could make out the sound of footsteps on gravel, getting louder, as someone was approaching the vehicle. The car door opened and the dome light was turned on, and I could tell that the camera was now on the floor of the car, pointing up towards the roof. I heard some fumbling in the background, and suddenly a thump sounded from the back of the truck. An arm abruptly obstructed the camera's view and a large tarp could be seen being pulled out from the car. I had only one scenario running through my head, and I hoped that it wasn't true. The person picked up the camera and put it back onto the console, and began to back up. They drove for a good 3 minutes before parking in a branched-off road, and exiting the car to work on the load they were carrying. 6 minutes after, the car was moved again to a different location, and the camera was picked up and carried and handed away from the car. I could see now that it was the same shit bucket truck that was in front of the seller's house. I was about ready to call the cops on this creep, when the camera turned towards the house. It was a completely different house than the one I visited. I was a little relieved by this, though it didn't prove anything. As the fourth video came to an end, I was wondering whether or not I was prepared to see what came next. I could only hope that this was a prank, or at least had a happy ending. 005 began inside the house. It was extremely dark, and the only thing I could make out was a figure that would occasionally walk in front of the camera. It was also quiet for the first few moments, minus the occasional barking of a dog outside. Eventually, a small sound started to appear. The small sound soon escalated to a loud, muffled scream. Shaking and struggling sounds became more apparent as time went on, as well as crying. A light abruptly came on, and the camera was lifted and panned to the center of the room, revealing a beaten and bloody woman tied to a chair. From what I could make out, this was, in fact, the woman from the bar. The camera zoomed in on her face for what seemed like an eternity before stopping. I couldn't believe that this was happening. The original hope that this was a movie or something like that had long since diminished. With only one video remaining, I was beginning to fear for my own safety. I locked my door, closed my blinds and pushed onward. I began 006 with a small hope that this woman was still alive, and that I could have her saved. The final installment of this horror show began in a bathroom setting. The camera was placed on the counter, facing a mirror, in which I could see a door. The only sound I could make was a familiar sound that destroyed my hopes: power tools. I sat in front of the screen for what felt like hours, before the sound stopped. More silence. Then, heavy footsteps, accompanied by what sounded like something being dragged. The doorknob turned and the door was pushed open. Out of the darkness of the rest of the house appeared a middle-aged woman dressed in what I can only describe as lab attire, sporting a respirator and a pair of long rubber gloves. This, for some strange reason, gave me a small amount of relief. In the reflection, the woman struggled to drag something to the bathtub. As she hoisted it into the tub, I could see that it was a large, black garbage bag. I felt like I was dreaming. It was like I was watching a horror movie unfolding on the screen. She lifted the bag up from the tub, now empty, except for whatever entrails that still dropped out. She picked up the camera and placed it on the ground, facing the tub. On the floor in front of the bathtub was an assortment of corrosive substances and several other empty containers. The woman began to dump the liquids into the tub, which was followed by an awful noise that I can only describe as pop rocks mixed with coke. The video ended, and I was left bewildered and panicked. I finally opened the pictures. The first was a picture of the truck. The second was a picture of the girl, tied up, before she was beaten. And the third picture brought up a corrupted file notice, but maybe that's a good thing. I managed to keep the two pictures, before I handed the laptop over to police. I was reimbursed my $600, along with a bonus. Apparently, the victim was the young girlfriend of the older woman's ex-husband. The older woman was arrested almost a year before, but was freed of all charges due to a lack of evidence, and the ex-husband was incarcerated instead. I guess this was the missing link. I hope this has solved any unanswered questions. Although, I'm not sure who the man in the flannel jacket was, or how he got a hold of the laptop, or how he owns the same truck as the murderer. I guess I'll just leave that to the police.
In March 12, 2007, in the/me/board of 4chan, an anonymous user posted a .gif image. At first glance, strangely, the .gif image wasn't animated. It was titled "I am happy.gif" and showed what appeared to be a drawing of a smiley face, only with realistic looking eyes and mouth. People who clicked on it saw the smiley face's smile slowly turn into a frown, and the eyes taking on an angrier appearance. The smiley face would then scream loudly, loud enough to burst eardrums, and gruesome images of rapes, bomb test victims, aborted fetuses, mutilated bodies, and animals being tortured would flash by quickly. After about 5 minutes, it would show the text "Have a nice day," and the user's computer would automatically close out of the browser and would stop working, as if a virus had corrupted the hard drive. People whose computers were infected would shortly be found in their homes, skinned and mutilated, with a smiley face painted in blood in the floor next to their corpses. The founder of 4chan, Moot, would always claim that the picture never existed, and that the murders were unrelated. However, somewhere in the archives, the picture still exists. Most people who attempt to post it are usually swiftly banned by Moot.
A few years ago, a mother and father decided they needed a break, so they wanted to head out for a night on the town. They called their most trusted babysitter. When the babysitter arrived, the two children were already fast asleep in bed. So the babysitter just got to sit around and make sure everything was okay with the children. Later that night, the babysitter got bored and went to watch TV, but she couldn't watch it downstairs, because they did not have cable downstairs. The parents didn't want children watching too much garbage. So, she called them and asked them if she could watch cable in the parents' room. Of course, the parents said it was okay, but the babysitter had one final request. She asked if she could cover up the angel statue outside the bedroom window with a blanket or cloth, because it made her nervous. The phone line was silent for a moment, and the father who was talking to the babysitter at the time said, "Take the children and get out of the house, we'll call the police. We don't own an angel statue." The police found both of the children and the babysitter slumped in pools of their own blood within 3 minutes of the call. No statue was found. So how was that, Sam? Was that so bad, because you and I had 3 other people to work with in one way or another?
Shut the hell up, Mary. I'm still a bit salty about the fact that we had to narrate about 3 stories total until now. But it was pretty good to read 2 more out of me for now. I hope that bastard Harold uses us more often instead of having the same damn voices for their narration videos.
Look, Sam, I understand you're a bit upset you and I had not been used for a good long bit. But you can't remain that pissed off with him. At least we are being used right now for this little video of his.
I guess you're right. I mean, for as long as I remember, you did a Kingdom Hearts story, while I covered a Lost episode and an urban gaming myth as long as my stupid amounts of exploits with that pissed off German kid Leopold Slick.